After pulling on her socks, Emily Parker had to sit down. The simple bend and stretch left her breathless, a slow pulse knocking under her skin as if someone were knocking from inside. Her due date was days away, and even lifting a glass of water felt like testing the limits of her balance. She eased to the edge of the bed, pressed a hand to the curve of her stomach, and waited for the lightheadedness to pass. From the living room, voices drifted down the hall. Ryan's soft, eager replies and Margaret's brisk instructions, as if the home were a radio tuned to a station she did not choose. The apartment belonged to Emily. Her grandmother's name was still etched on the mailbox downstairs. But lately, every sound felt like permission granted to someone else. Margaret had moved in to help. That was the word she used. Help. The way some people say weather. An inevitability, not a request. A widow with a spine of iron and a widow's certainty. She knew the world better than anyone. She filtered everything through experience and righteousness. Emily had met her before the wedding. Smiles, casseroles, backpats, and had believed she could manage. But after the second trimester, nausea came and went. Margaret parked her suitcase by the door and announced that a first-time mother should not be left alone. Ryan, grateful and relieved, welcomed her with open arms and an open calendar. Margaret set her bag in the second bedroom and began narrating their days. Eat this, not that. Don't nap now. It will ruin your night. Put on a scarf. Call a different doctor. Thank you for the soup. Thank you for the folded towels, Emily said, and kept quietly repeating to herself that this was temporary. Ryan was not cruel. He simply bent toward the person who pushed hardest. The night they met, he had been the man who drew little maps for her on cocktail napkins, telling her where he'd lived in the city, what he loved. Ball games by the river, late-night rides on the brown line where the tracks glittered above the street like a necklace. He was kind then, attentive, quick to laugh. They rented an apartment close to the L, and made plans that felt like walking into a warm room from the cold. After the wedding, Margaret's calls multiplied. Then life rearranged itself into 3 chairs at the same table. When the pregnancy test turned positive, the chair at the head of that table was already occupied. On the morning of the clinic appointment, Emily leaned against the doorframe while Ryan tied his shoe. Margaret hovered with a coat draped over her forearm, critical eyes moving top to bottom and back again. "You're going out in that?" she asked, as if Emily had decided to wear rain instead of a sweater. "Your stomach is practically bare. These trains are drafty. You'll catch something and the baby will catch it too." "It's comfortable," Emily said quietly. She wanted the morning to be a bridge, not a battlefield. Ryan offered a guilty smile that lasted only until Margaret cleared her throat. "Mom's probably right," he then said. "Maybe a longer coat." Emily buttoned her jacket and swallowed the retort that rose hot and immediate. As they stepped into the hallway, she told herself to borrow the strength of small steps. Elevator, sidewalk, station. The city moved around them with its ordinary winter efficiency. A gray sky layered over gray streets. On the platform, the wind cut through seams of clothing, and the rails sang somewhere to the south. Crowds bunched near the doors, necks craned, hands ready. The train arrived with a roar, and the 3 of them were dragged inside by momentum and strangers. Bodies pressed close. Phones hovered like dim stars above bowed heads. The car smelled faintly of coffee and wool. Emily gripped the pole. Then another contraction of the crowd knocked her against the end seat of a bench. The man beside it stood and gestured. "Take it," he said, weary and kind, eyes flicking to her belly and back to her face. "Thank you," she managed, easing down. Relief spread in her thighs, a warmth that felt like mercy. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and rested a hand over the baby's slow roll. Margaret, still standing, looked at the seat the way a cat looks at a recently vacated patch of sunlight. Her mouth pinched, then smoothed into something almost magnanimous. "Ryan," she said low enough for only them to hear. "My knees are not what they used to be." He glanced at his mother's face, then at Emily's. The car jolted. A chorus of straps creaked and he made his choice. He leaned over, fingers closing around Emily's forearm, and tugged. "Mom's tired," he whispered. "Come on, Em. Be respectful." For a second, the world went silent in the loudest place in Chicago. Emily's body didn't want to move. The baby shifted in protest. The seat under her was the only island she had found all morning. She looked up at Ryan's urgent face and saw no malice there, only an eagerness to keep the water smooth, to make the person who complained the loudest quiet again. Margaret's gaze was waiting, assessing. The man who had offered the seat watched the exchange with a frown beginning between his eyebrows. A woman standing by the door stiffened. Emily felt heat rise under her collarbone. Ryan pulled again, not hard enough to leave a mark, just hard enough to make standing the path of least resistance. She stood, her knees wobbled. Margaret lowered herself into the spot with a sigh that performed gratitude without offering it. "Thank you, son," she said, loud enough to be heard by everyone who had pretended not to stare. "In my age, you must prioritize." In the reflection on the window, Emily saw her own face go pale. She was tired of being reasonable. Reasonable had carried her through stacked dishes and unasked for advice, through the doctor's office where Margaret interrupted to ask if the younger physicians even knew what they were doing anymore, through nights when she held back tears because tears became lessons she didn't want to receive. But the train lurched again, and she wrapped her hand around the pole and told herself to keep breathing. Across the aisle, a teenage girl narrowed her eyes, as if memorizing this for later. Farther down, a man shook his head once, sharp and disgusted. Someone muttered, "Come on," and the word floated like a leaf no one claimed. The humiliation settled slowly, a drizzle that soaked everything. It wasn't the seat. It was the ritual. It was the way Ryan's fingers assumed she could be moved. It was the performance of weakness from a woman who was never weak in any moment that gave her the upper hand. Emily thought of the apartment, her grandmother's china wrapped in paper in a cabinet Margaret rearranged. The framed photo of Emily and Ryan at the lake, repositioned to make room for an urn that did not belong to this house. The calendar filled with appointments Emily had not penciled in. She heard her doctor's voice from last week. "You need rest, Emily. Your blood pressure is creeping up." And she heard Margaret's reply over it. "We didn't have all these worries and we were fine. Young women are too soft now." And she swallowed hard. At the next stop, the doors parted and a wave of air moved through. A woman, who had been seated near the middle, rose with care. She was older than Margaret by a decade at least, wrapped in a plain coat and a scarf that looked hand-knit the color of oatmeal. Her hair was the soft gray of sky before snow. She stepped toward Emily with the steadiness of a person who had spent a lifetime deciding when to speak. Her eyes took in the scene quickly. The young woman on her feet, the round stomach, the mother seated, the hovering son, the uneasy witnesses. Then she addressed only Emily. "Sit here, honey," she said, and her voice had the firmness of a porch light turning on. She took Emily's hand and guided her toward the seat she had just vacated. There was no fuss, no sermon. The car quieted further, the way a room quiets when someone tells the truth without raising her voice. Emily lowered herself, breath shivering as she did, her eyes blurred. She could feel Margaret stare like cold air on damp skin, could feel Ryan's confusion coalescing into embarrassment. The older woman bent closer, just enough that her words touched only the people who needed to hear them. "God sees everything," she whispered. The sentence landed with a clarity that made the steel under Emily's feet feel less hostile. It was not a curse. It was not even a defense. It was a reminder that the ledger was not being kept by the loudest person in the room. Emily blinked hard, nodded, and swallowed. The baby nudged beneath her palm. A small hello as if answering a roll call. At the following stop, the woman stepped off without turning back, her scarf trailing like a bookmark in a long story. The doors closed and the train kept on, the city scenery unspooling in squares of brick and glass. Margaret crossed her ankles and stared at the advertisement above the opposite seats with the interest of someone refusing to be moved by anything but her own reflection. Ryan shifted, then let his hand drop from the pole, then shifted again. He angled himself as if to speak to Emily, but the words didn't come. Perhaps for once he had no script. The rest of the ride passed in the quiet noise of commuters. When they reached their stop, Emily stood carefully, thanking the anonymous man who had first offered his seat with a look rather than words. She stepped onto the platform with the sentence still warm in her ears. "God sees everything." It traveled with her down the stairs and onto the windbright street, past the clinic doors and the waiting room chair and the blood pressure cuff that would leave a red kiss on her arm. It traveled with her like a small shield no one else could see. Emily remembered the night she first met Ryan as if it had been drawn in brighter colors than the rest of her life. She had been 24, finishing her graduate program, sitting at a friend's party with a paper plate balanced on her lap. Ryan walked in late, laughing at something a colleague whispered in his ear. His coat slung over one shoulder as if the city itself weighed nothing. He made his way through the room with a kind of warmth that drew people toward him. When he finally sat beside her, he asked questions that were not filler, but genuine curiosity. What books had she loved as a child? What places did she want to see before she turned 30? That night, he walked her to the train, insisting on waiting until the doors closed. He was thoughtful, attentive, and most importantly, he made her feel visible in a world that often looked past her. In those first months, Emily had felt like she was in the center of a story that finally belonged to her. Ryan sent good morning texts, left flowers on her porch, and learned the names of her favorite novels. When he proposed, it was on the Riverwalk at dusk, the city lights bouncing off the water like promises. She said yes without hesitation. The wedding was simple, a small gathering in a church just outside the city. And as they exchanged vows, Emily believed she was stepping into a marriage that would hold her steady. What she did not know, what no one could have prepared her for, was how quickly Margaret would fill the spaces they thought belonged to them. At first, it was the casual comments during Sunday dinners. Margaret had been widowed for a decade, a woman accustomed to running her household with no dissent. She carried herself with the air of someone who believed that survival gave her authority over every room she entered. Emily brushed it off in the beginning. Ryan's mother had opinions, yes, but so did most mothers. It seemed harmless, even affectionate. The shift came after they discovered Emily was pregnant. Margaret's voice on the phone turned brisk, then insistent. She needed to move in, she explained, because a young woman alone could not possibly manage the demands of carrying a child. Emily had wanted to protest, wanted to say that she and Ryan had planned carefully, that she could handle this. But Ryan's relief was so immediate, so visible, that the words stayed in her throat. He hugged his mother the night she arrived with her suitcases and said, "This will be good for us." Emily told herself it was temporary. But Margaret did not simply inhabit the spare room. She colonized. Within days, she rearranged the kitchen cabinets, placing the teapot Emily's grandmother had left her on a higher shelf, and filling the counter with her own collection of cast iron pans. She rewrote grocery lists in her own handwriting. She decided the thermostat should stay at 68, no matter how cold Emily felt in the evenings. She hovered at the bathroom door with reminders of how long a pregnant woman should soak in the tub. Her presence pressed into every corner until Emily could barely recognize the apartment as her own. Meals became battlegrounds. Margaret subscribed to a strict regimen of what she considered proper pregnancy nutrition, drawn from decades-old magazines and home remedies. She set boiled liver and overcooked spinach in front of Emily and frowned when the younger woman gagged at the smell. "Don't be dramatic," Margaret scolded. "Your baby needs iron." If Emily asked for plain toast, Margaret clucked her tongue and accused her of selfishness. Ryan, caught between them, always softened his voice when he sided with his mother. "She just wants the best for you," he would say, as though intention excused intrusion. Each time, Emily swallowed her frustration and chewed dutifully, her throat tight with resentment. Sleep offered no refuge. Margaret believed naps during the day were a sign of laziness. If Emily retreated to the bedroom for rest, Margaret knocked on the door under the pretense of checking on her. "Stay up," she advised. "You'll never sleep at night if you close your eyes now." Ryan repeated the refrain with a smile, brushing hair from Emily's face. But it was Margaret's script he was reciting. The walls of the apartment felt thinner, the room smaller. Privacy disappeared like air from a sealed jar. The tension sharpened during medical visits. At the clinic, Emily tried to cling to the professionalism of white coats and measured tones. At one appointment, her obstetrician pressed the stethoscope gently against her belly, listening for the steady rhythm of the baby's heart. The doctor smiled and spoke directly to Emily. "You need to make rest your priority now. Your blood pressure is higher than I'd like. Stress is not your friend at this stage. Sleep, reduce conflict where you can, and remember to care for yourself as much as for the baby." Emily nodded, grateful for words that validated what her body had been shouting for weeks. But before she could respond, Margaret leaned forward in her chair with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Nonsense," she declared. "Young women today are coddled. I worked double shifts through both of my pregnancies. We didn't have blood pressure cuffs and special diets. We did just fine. Don't fill her head with worry. The doctor, accustomed to difficult family members, cleared his throat and repeated his recommendation with more firmness, but the moment was already fractured. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, looking from his mother to his wife, and then chose silence. In that silence, Emily heard everything. Margaret's voice, Ryan's complicity, the erasure of her own needs. The doctor's words evaporated in the air like steam from a cooling cup. Walking back from the clinic, Emily carried the paper printout of her test results folded in her pocket. Each step felt heavier than the one before. She wanted Ryan to take her hand, to tell her that her well-being mattered, that he would draw the line against his mother's overreach. Instead, he kept close to Margaret, listening to her commentary about traffic and weather, nodding in rhythm. When Emily slowed, no one noticed. When she stopped to catch her breath, it was the stranger behind them who muttered, "Are you all right?" Ryan finally glanced back, embarrassed, and ushered her forward. Margaret rolled her eyes as if Emily's exhaustion were another indulgence. By the time they reached the apartment, the realization had settled inside her like a stone. In her husband's world, there were two women. One commanded loyalty through history and grief. The other, his wife, the mother of his unborn child, was an afterthought. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo of her grandmother that still hung above the dresser. The apartment was hers by inheritance, but her place within it had become conditional. She pressed her palm to her stomach, felt the baby shift in response, and whispered a promise only the child could hear. In that moment she understood with a clarity that left her trembling. She and her daughter would always come second to Margaret in Ryan's eyes. The knowledge did not yet lead to action, but it rooted itself deep inside, a seed of inevitability waiting for its season. The apartment was dark except for the glow of the city lights bleeding in through the blinds. Emily shifted on the couch, trying to find a position that relieved the ache in her lower back. At first she thought it was another night of discomfort, the kind every pregnant woman near her due date came to expect. But then the pain sharpened, cutting through her abdomen with the precision of a blade. She doubled over, a hand pressed to her belly, breath shallow. It was too early. She wasn't supposed to be in labor for another 2 weeks. "Ryan," she called out, her voice trembling. Her husband was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, startled, as she clutched the armrest, her knuckles white. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "It's happening. The baby." Ryan hurried over, panic already flaring in his eyes. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just—" His words faltered when another contraction ripped through her, forcing her to bite down on a cry. She shook her head, sweat beading along her hairline. This was no false alarm. From the bedroom, Margaret's sharp voice cut into the chaos. "Ryan." The sound was theatrical, drawn out like a curtain call. "Ryan, I can't breathe." Her words were punctuated with coughs that sounded rehearsed. "My chest, it's my heart." Ryan froze, torn between his wife writhing on the couch and his mother calling from the other room. "Mom, hold on," he shouted, then turned to Emily. "Just wait. Let me check on her." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "I need you now," she said, voice cracking. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last, stealing her breath. She grabbed his wrist. "Please, Ryan, the baby's coming." But Margaret wailed louder, her voice echoing down the hall. "Ryan, don't let me die alone." Panic overtook reason in Ryan's face. He wrenched his hand away and bolted toward his mother's room. "Emily." Emily stared after him, stunned. Each second stretched like an accusation. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath the weight of pain and betrayal. The next cry that left her lips wasn't just from labor. It was the sound of something inside her breaking. Minutes blurred. She heard Ryan's frantic voice on the phone calling for an ambulance, but not for her. He was describing Margaret's symptoms, pacing the hall as if his wife's contractions were background noise. Emily realized then that if she didn't act, she and her baby would be alone in the fight for their lives. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She dialed 911, her voice ragged. "I'm 38 weeks pregnant," she told the dispatcher between breaths. "The contractions, they're coming fast. My husband, he left me. I need help. Please send someone." The operator's voice was steady, grounding. "Stay on the line, ma'am. We're sending EMS to your location right now. Can you lie down on your side? Keep breathing. You're not alone. The sirens arrived sooner than she expected, their wail threading through the streets below. Within minutes, uniformed paramedics burst into the apartment. They found her on the floor, pale and trembling, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. "Ma'am, we've got you," one of them said firmly. They guided her onto a blanket, checking her pulse, monitoring the baby's heartbeat with swift efficiency. The contractions were too close together to risk a hospital transfer. They would have to deliver here. Emily's world narrowed to commands and reassurances. "Breathe. Keep pushing. Almost there." She bore down, tears streaming, the pain relentless and consuming. In the corner of her eye, she saw Ryan hovering helplessly, Margaret clutching his arm, pretending still to be weak. But no one was paying attention to them now. The focus was on Emily, on the small life fighting to enter the world. One of the paramedics, her badge read Elena Morales, knelt beside Emily, holding her hand. "Look at me," she said softly. "You can do this. You're stronger than you think." Her calm eyes anchored Emily through the storm. With a final scream, Emily felt the sudden release, the sharpness of pain replaced by the fragile cry of a newborn. The sound pierced the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. A tiny girl, red and squalling, was lifted into the light. "Baby girl," Elena announced, her voice thick with emotion. "She's early, but she's breathing." The scale read 5 pounds 8 ounces, small but fighting. Emily's arms opened instinctively, and the baby was placed against her chest. Warmth and life spread through her as she cradled her daughter for the first time. Tears fell freely, mingling with the baby's soft cries. "Elena," she whispered, looking at the nurse who had stayed by her side. "Her name is Elena." Then softer to the child herself. "Lena, you're mine." The paramedics worked quickly, cutting the cord, checking vitals, wrapping the infant in a blanket. Emily's father, Charles Bennett, arrived moments later, his face ashen from rushing through the night. When he saw his daughter and granddaughter, relief crumpled his expression. He knelt beside Emily, pressing a trembling kiss to her damp forehead. "You're safe," he whispered. "You both made it." Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her, but she clung to her father's voice. She thought of the moment Ryan chose his mother's feigned illness over his wife's cries, and the betrayal burned deeper than the contractions ever had. Yet in that same night of abandonment, she had been carried by strangers who treated her with dignity, and by the one man who had never failed her, her father. Lena stirred against her chest, tiny fingers curling around Emily's thumb. Emily looked down, and something fierce ignited inside her. A vow that this child would never feel second to anyone. Not to Margaret, not even to Ryan. This baby was her reason, her proof of survival. And from this moment forward, Emily knew she would fight with everything she had. The apartment, once suffocating with Margaret's authority, now held the sound of new life. Sirens faded. Neighbors whispered behind doors. But in the center of the chaos, a mother and daughter breathed together for the first time, and Charles Bennett, steady and resolute, remained by their side, the only true witness to both the betrayal and the miracle of that night. The fluorescent lights of the maternity ward hummed low against the quiet of the night. Emily lay propped against stiff hospital pillows, her daughter swaddled close to her chest. Lena's breath was soft, barely a flutter against her mother's skin. But every rise and fall was proof that they had survived. The chaos of delivery still lingered in Emily's body, yet the fear had given way to a calm resolve. She stroked the baby's tiny hand, memorizing the shape of her fingers, the fragile curl that clung to her own. Her phone vibrated on the tray table. The screen lit up with Ryan's name. For a moment Emily just stared, a pulse of anger running beneath her ribs. She considered ignoring it, but something inside urged her to answer. With one arm she adjusted Lena, and with the other, she pressed the phone to her ear. "Emily." Ryan's voice came through, strained but not broken. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. Mom, she was having a heart attack. I panicked. I thought she needed me." Emily closed her eyes, her jaw tightening. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice cool. "I was in labor, Ryan. I told you the baby was coming and you left me. You chose her." A long pause stretched on the line. "I was scared," he finally muttered. "I thought I could handle both, but..." No. Her tone cut through his excuses like glass. You abandoned me. You abandoned your daughter before she even took her first breath. Do you understand what that means? He exhaled shakily. Emily, please. I made a mistake. I'll come tomorrow. Elle. You are no longer my husband, Emily said flatly. The words left her lips with a weight she hadn't anticipated. But once spoken they felt permanent. I won't let your mother near this child. Not after tonight. On the other end, Ryan sputtered. Don't say that. She just wants. I don't care what she wants, Emily interrupted. Her voice was low but steady, vibrating with a strength she had never felt before. This isn't about her. This is about me and about Lena. I will not raise my daughter in the shadow of your mother's control. We're done. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Lena's soft stirring against Emily's chest. Ryan didn't argue again. He simply hung up the call, ending with a hollow click. Emily let the phone slip from her hand onto the blanket. She felt no regret, only a strange lightness, as if chains had quietly fallen away. She looked down at Lena, whose eyes blinked open for a brief moment, dark and unfocused, yet full of promise. It's just us now, she whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. And that's enough. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Charles Bennett stepped inside, carrying a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His eyes softened when he saw his daughter holding his granddaughter. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed, his large hands folded awkwardly in his lap. How are you holding up? He asked quietly. Emily shook her head, tears stinging but not falling. I told him, Dad. It's over. I said he's not my husband anymore. I said Margaret won't ever see Lena. Charles reached across and rested his weathered hand over hers. You did the right thing. His voice was firm without hesitation. I raised you to stand up for yourself, Emily. I may not have always been perfect, but I know this. A man who walks away when you need him most doesn't deserve you. And his mother certainly doesn't deserve a place in your child's life. Emily's throat tightened. I thought I needed him, she admitted. All this time I thought if I just kept the peace, if I stayed quiet, things would get better. But tonight, when he left me, I realized he was never going to choose me. Not over her. Charles nodded, pride flickering in his tired eyes. That realization is painful, but it's also freedom. You can build a life for you and Lena that isn't dictated by anyone else's demands. You're stronger than you think. Emily studied her father, the lines etched deep across his face, the quiet certainty in his gaze. For the first time in months she believed him. She wasn't the passive woman enduring another's authority. She was a mother now, and that role carried a fierceness she hadn't known existed inside her. The thought of Margaret's hands reaching for Lena filled her with defiance so sharp it steadied her spine. Never again, she vowed silently. Never again would she allow someone else to decide her worth. The night stretched on, but Emily didn't feel alone. Charles dozed in the chair, his head tilted back while Lena slept curled against her. Outside, the city kept moving. Ambulances racing down streets, trains rumbling over tracks, lives unfolding in endless rhythm. Inside the small hospital room, however, a new life had begun, one defined not by submission but by resolve. When dawn touched the blinds with pale light, Emily felt ready. She was exhausted, yes, but her exhaustion was layered with conviction. She had crossed a threshold. The woman who once stayed silent at her own dinner table, who tolerated whispers and commands, was gone. In her place stood a mother who would protect her daughter at all costs. And though the road ahead promised battles, legal, emotional, and otherwise, Emily knew the hardest step had already been taken. She had chosen herself. She had chosen Lena, and that choice made her unshakable. Emily sat stiffly in the leather chair, her newborn daughter asleep in a carrier at her side. Across the desk, attorney Karen Mitchell scanned through the intake form with practiced efficiency. The office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Shelves lined with binders labeled Family Law Illinois and Protective Orders. The blinds were half-drawn, allowing only a muted strip of daylight. Emily felt as though she had stepped into another kind of courtroom already, one where every detail of her life would be weighed. Karen looked up, her expression softened by years of guiding women through the storm. First, she said gently, take a breath. You're not the first mother to sit in this chair with a newborn and a broken marriage. And you won't be the last. We're going to make sure you and your daughter are safe." Emily's throat tightened. She nodded, clutching Lena's blanket with white knuckles. "I need a divorce," she said. "And I need to keep my apartment. It was my grandmother's. Ryan and his mother." She paused, her jaw clenched. "They can't have it." Karen flipped a page. "Good news. Because the apartment is inherited property, it's considered non-marital under Illinois law. That means it's yours. He has no claim." Relief stirred faintly in Emily's chest. "Now, about custody, or rather what we now call allocation of parental responsibilities, we'll file for you to be the sole residential parent. Given what you've described, it's realistic." Emily exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a fraction. "And his mother, she wants to see Lena. She's already talking about taking her." Karen's eyes sharpened. "We can petition for a protective order. It would cover both Ryan and his mother if necessary. But more importantly, you need to document everything. Every threat, every uninvited visit, every time they raise their voices. Judges like evidence. Install cameras at the door. Save text messages. Keep a log. The more meticulous you are, the stronger your case." The lawyer leaned forward, her tone steady. "Change the locks today. You don't want them walking in uninvited. And remember, if they show up and harass you, call the police. Don't hesitate. The system works best when you use it." Emily nodded, determination tightening inside her. For months, she had let Margaret rewrite the rules of her home. Now she would rewrite them herself. That evening, Charles arrived with the locksmith. Emily watched as the old lock clattered into a tray, and a new deadbolt clicked into place. It felt symbolic, as if the house itself was taking her side at last. A week later, small cameras blinked above the doorframe, ready to record every intrusion. Each light became a silent ally, promising that Emily's truth would not be erased again. The first test came quickly on a gray Tuesday morning. Pounding rattled the door. Margaret's voice sliced through the wood. "Emily, open this door right now. That's our granddaughter in there. Don't you dare keep her from her family." Emily's pulse jumped, but she stayed seated at the kitchen table. The camera caught everything. The banging, the shrill demands, Ryan's voice joining in. Please," he said through the door, his tone a mix of pleading and frustration. "Just let us see her. Mom's been sick with worry. Don't punish us like this." Lena stirred in her bassinet, whimpering at the noise. Emily scooped her up, rocking gently, forcing calm into her voice, though her insides shook. "You need to leave," she called out. "I told you not to come here. This is harassment." Margaret's reply was venomous. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I've done for you, you think you can keep that child away from me? You'll regret this." Emily dialed 911 with steady fingers. "My estranged husband and his mother are pounding on my door and refusing to leave," she told the dispatcher. By the time officers arrived, Margaret had retreated down the hall, muttering curses, while Ryan lingered with a conflicted expression. The police warned them both and filed a report. Emily tucked the paperwork into her growing folder of evidence. The visits did not stop. Some days it was flowers left at the door, accompanied by Ryan's notes. "Please, I just want to hold her." Other days it was Margaret's threats shouted through the hallway. Emily documented it all. Photos, recordings, phone logs. Each entry hardened her resolve. She wasn't merely collecting data. She was building the foundation of her defense, brick by brick. One night, Ryan called, his voice quieter than usual. "Emily, I need to see my daughter," he said. "I know Mom pushes too hard, but she loves Lena. You can't keep her from us forever." Emily gripped the phone tightly. "Ryan, you had your chance. The night she was born, you weren't there. You chose your mother, not us. Don't call me again, unless it's through my lawyer." He hesitated. "I just want to make things right." "You can't make things right while standing in her shadow," Emily replied. "Until you realize that, you'll never really want what's best for Lena. You'll only want what Margaret tells you to want." She ended the call before he could answer. For the first time, the silence that followed was not lonely. It was liberating. Weeks passed in a rhythm of feedings, doctor's appointments, and legal paperwork. Emily grew used to the click of the camera recording another confrontation, the weight of the evidence folder on her desk. Charles visited daily, bringing groceries and quiet encouragement. Each time Margaret and Ryan tried to force their way back into her life, Emily felt less like prey and more like a witness gathering proof. At the next meeting in Karen's office, Emily slid the folder across the desk. "I've recorded everything," she said. "Every knock, every threat, every call." Karen flipped through the pages, satisfaction evident. "This is exactly what we need. With this, the judge will see who they really are." "You've done everything right, Emily." For the first time since Lena's birth, Emily allowed herself a small, certain smile. She wasn't merely reacting anymore. She was preparing. The legal battle loomed ahead, but she was ready. Every slammed fist on her door, every poisonous word from Margaret, every half-hearted plea from Ryan had become part of a record that would speak louder than their lies. And when the time came to stand before the judge, Emily knew she would no longer be the woman who once yielded her seat, her voice, her home. She was the mother of Lena Bennett Parker, and she would not be moved. The courthouse in downtown Chicago loomed gray and unyielding, its stone columns catching the weak light of morning. Emily walked up the steps with Lena's car seat balanced in her father's hands. She wore a plain navy dress, her hair pulled back tightly, her shoulders squared. The weight of months of fear and preparation pressed down on her, but she carried it with quiet determination. Today she would not be silent. Today her voice would be heard inside the Cook County Family Division. The air hummed with the low murmur of cases being shuffled, families whispering, attorneys checking watches. Emily sat at the petitioner's table beside attorney Karen Mitchell, her folder of evidence stacked neatly between them. Across the aisle, Ryan slouched in his chair, adjusting his tie as though it strangled him. Margaret sat rigid beside him, her lips pressed into a thin, self-righteous line. She wore black as if attending a funeral, her hands folded with the gravity of a martyr. The judge, a woman in her 50s with clear eyes and no patience for theatrics, called the case to order. "Parker versus Parker," she announced. "Petition for dissolution of marriage and allocation of parental responsibilities." Karen rose first. "Your Honor, my client, Emily Parker, seeks full allocation of parental responsibilities and parenting time on the grounds that her estranged husband and his mother have created an unsafe and hostile environment for both mother and child." She gestured to Emily, who met the judge's gaze steadily. "We will present evidence of harassment, neglect, and abandonment at the time of birth." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Ryan's attorney, a younger man with nervous eyes, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client simply wishes to be part of his daughter's life. Any suggestion that he or his mother pose a danger is exaggerated." Before the words had finished echoing, Margaret leaned forward and spoke directly to the bench, her voice loud and brittle. "I only ever wanted to help. I moved in because Emily was too fragile to handle pregnancy on her own. I cooked. I cleaned. I guided her. And this is how she repays me. By shutting me out, by poisoning my son against me." The judge held up a hand. "Mrs. Parker, you will have your turn. Do not interrupt counsel." Margaret sat back, eyes flashing. Emily felt the old familiar sting of those words, the manipulation disguised as concern, but this time she had more than her voice. She had proof. Karen called the first piece of evidence. Security footage from the camera Emily had installed above her apartment door. The screen flickered to life, showing Margaret pounding on the door, her voice raised in rage. "You ungrateful girl. That's our granddaughter in there." Ryan's figure shifted uneasily in the background, half-heartedly pulling her arm, failing to stop her. The judge's brow furrowed as the video played on, capturing every word, every threat, every attempt to push past the door. Next came audio recordings of phone calls. Ryan pleading, Margaret shouting, Emily's calm refusals. The courtroom fell silent, except for Margaret's shrill accusations echoing from the speakers. "You'll regret this," her voice threatened in one clip, undeniable and unedited. Ryan squirmed in his seat. His attorney attempted to minimize the impact. "Your Honor, emotions run high in family matters. My client's mother may have spoken harshly, but she has no intention of harm. She simply desires contact with her granddaughter." The judge tilted her head. "Mr. Parker, did you instruct your mother to stop these visits?" Ryan hesitated. I tried, but she's persistent. Persistent, the judge repeated dryly. And did you support your wife during childbirth? Ryan's face flushed. He shifted. I thought my mother was having a heart attack. I had to choose. Emily stood when Karen gave her the signal. Her voice carried clearly across the room. Not shrill, not broken, but steady. He chose wrong, she said. Your Honor, I was in active labor. I told him the baby was coming. He looked me in the eye and walked away. He left me to call 911 alone. The paramedics delivered my daughter in our apartment while he stood down the hall with his mother. A ripple went through the courtroom. Even Ryan's attorney looked stricken. Emily's voice faltered for just a moment, but she caught herself and continued. I don't care about myself anymore. But my daughter, she deserves a father who won't abandon her for someone else's theatrics. She deserves safety. She deserves peace. Her father Charles sat in the back row, tears bright in his eyes. For months he had watched his daughter carry humiliation in silence. Now he saw her stand unflinching, telling the truth no one could deny. The judge folded her hands. I have heard enough. She glanced at Ryan, then at Margaret, whose face had gone blotchy with rage. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of harassment and neglect. Mrs. Parker, her eyes turned to Emily, you will be awarded full allocation of parental responsibilities. Mr. Parker, you will be granted supervised parenting time at a court-approved center. Contact will remain limited until you can demonstrate the capacity to act independently of your mother. Margaret shot to her feet, her voice shrieking across the room. This is outrageous. She's turning you against us with lies. She's stealing my granddaughter. Sit down, Mrs. Parker, the judge ordered firmly, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Margaret's outburst died in her throat. She sank back into her chair, seething, her carefully curated mask of virtue shattered in front of everyone. Ryan's shoulders slumped. He stared at the floor, unable to meet Emily's eyes. Emily inhaled deeply, the first breath in months that felt free. She reached for her attorney's hand, whispered thanks, then turned toward the gallery where Charles waited. He gave her a small nod, pride and relief etched across his face. As court adjourned, Margaret's fury hung heavy in the air. But Emily no longer carried its weight. She lifted Lena's car seat into her arms and walked out of the courtroom, not as the woman who had once been silenced, but as the mother who had fought and won the right to protect her child. The months that followed the courtroom verdict carried a different rhythm, slower, steadier, and mercifully quiet. Emily moved into her father's house on the northwest side of Chicago, a modest two-story with creaking stairs and the scent of old wood that always reminded her of childhood. Charles converted the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling a crib with his own hands. It was not glamorous, but it was safe. And for Emily, that meant everything. Each day became a pattern stitched together by small victories. Feedings at dawn, short naps in the afternoon, and evenings when Emily sat in the rocking chair humming lullabies her grandmother once sang to her. Charles hovered in the background, carrying laundry baskets, boiling bottles, always reminding his daughter that she was not alone. He never spoke harshly about Ryan or Margaret, but his silence on their names was its own kind of judgment. Spring arrived, and with it a sense of renewal. Emily began walking with Lena in the park a few blocks from the house. At first she moved slowly, her body still recovering, her spirit still fragile. But each week the walks grew longer. She watched her daughter's eyes widen at the sight of trees budding green, listened to her squeals of delight when ducks skimmed across the pond. The park became their sanctuary, a place where Margaret's voice could not reach, where Ryan's absence was not a wound, but a relief. One afternoon, Emily spread a blanket under an oak tree and placed Lena on her back. The baby's arms flailed in the sunlight, her giggles rising like music above the city noise. Emily lay beside her, touching her daughter's tiny fingers, and for the first time in years, she felt joy unaccompanied by dread. People walked by with strollers and bicycles, some smiling at the young mother on the grass. Emily no longer shrank from their gaze. She belonged in the open air, in the light, in her own story. Seasons turned. Emily enrolled in night classes, determined to finish the degree she had abandoned during her marriage. Charles babysat without complaint, cradling Lena in his lap while marking crossword puzzles with a blunt pencil. When Emily came home late, exhausted but exhilarated, He always said the same thing. "You're doing it, Em. You're building the life you deserve." The years unfolded in steady chapters. Lena grew from a toddler chasing butterflies to a little girl with paint-stained fingers and an endless list of questions. She loved swings most of all, begging her mother to push higher and higher, her laughter ringing out across the playground. Emily, standing behind her, often thought about how far they had both come, from a night of abandonment and fear to this bright arc of motion, her daughter flying safely forward under her hands. By the time Lena turned 5, Emily was no longer the woman who once surrendered her seat on the train or her silence at the dinner table. She carried herself differently, shoulders back, eyes level. She had a job she loved at a community center, teaching art to children who reminded her daily of resilience. Her degree hung framed above her desk, a testament to battles fought and won. Most of all, she had Lena, healthy, radiant, with curls that caught the sunlight and a confidence that grew from knowing she was deeply loved. On a crisp autumn evening, mother and daughter walked home from the park hand in hand. Leaves crunched under their shoes, the air scented with wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Emily felt content, almost weightless. She squeezed Lena's small hand, smiling as the girl chattered about her day at kindergarten, her new friend, her painting of a dragon, the teacher who said she was clever. When they turned the corner onto their street, the house came into view. Emily slowed. A figure stood on the porch, rigid against the fading light. Even from a distance she recognized the posture, the tightly folded arms, the stubborn tilt of the chin. Margaret Parker. Emily's steps faltered, and Lena looked up, puzzled. "Mommy, who's that?" Emily tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. Her heartbeat quickened. But this time it wasn't fear that surged through her veins. It was readiness. She had spent 5 years rebuilding her life, brick by brick, promise by promise. She would not let the past dismantle what she had created. The woman on the porch straightened, her eyes locking on Emily's across the distance. The silence between them carried all the weight of history. Humiliation, betrayal, judgment. But behind Emily stood the child she had sworn to protect, and within her pulsed the certainty of a mother who had already fought the darkest battles. She walked forward slowly, Lena's hand safe in hers. The evening air grew still, the neighborhood sounds fading into the background. Every step was a reminder. From public shame to private despair, from courtroom reckoning to personal renewal. The journey had not broken her. It had remade her. As Emily reached the edge of the walkway, she lifted her chin. The story was not over. Margaret's reappearance proved that. But Emily was no longer the woman who could be silenced. Whatever confrontation waited beyond that porch, she would face it with strength born from suffering, with the unwavering resolve of a mother who had chosen healing over fear. The door between past and future stood open. And as dusk fell over Chicago, Emily knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever came next, she and Lena would face it together.